Hi, good morning. Welcome to the show. I'm Anli, an associate professor of modern East Asian history at UT Dallas. Today, I'm speaking with Dr. Darcie Vandergrift. Darcie Vandergrift is a sociologist and was a full professor at Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa. After nearly 2 decades working at Drake University, where she earned many awards for teaching and mentoring, she made a transition outside of academia in 2018. Darcy now works in a regional government with the Twin Cities Metropolitan Council, where she founded one of the country's first public sector quantitative research teams. Her research connects community voices, youth perspectives, and policy decisions to shape how the region plans for its future. Hi, Darcy. Thank you very much for your time being in the show today.
Hi, Anne. It's so great to be here with you.
So, in this new season, we try to provide some perspective to reimagine what a tenure professor can do and how we can transfer scholarly skills in other fields and make larger impacts. And also for graduate students who are listening to think about alternatives to an academic career. So I remember in 2018 when you first broke the news and said that you're leaving academia, I was like, to be honest, I was totally shocked because at that time you were a full professor. And I remember you were also the director and the head of the Center for the Humanities, where I was a committee member at. And then you were also one of the few people that I knew actually left. I know that we complain about our job a lot, and then we always talk about leaving, but you are the only person that actually in my circle that actually make the move and left. And also it's different from people that I know. You actually did something completely different, like from being in the academy. For many people that I knew, friends, and also examples in the professors is out after they left academia, and then they became a coach for editing, for writing. But you were doing something completely different. So I always want to have an opportunity to talk with you. But as you know, in our job, everything is always in a huge rush. And we never have the opportunity to sit down and talk about like what you did and how are you right now. So how did this opportunity come up?
Yeah, and again, Anne, it's so great you're always such a generous listener and interlocutor, so it's really nice to get to be here with you today. So I had a sabbatical in 2018, 2019, and I wanted to go someplace else for sabbatical, and there were some opportunities for my children in the Twin Cities, and we had always loved the Twin Cities, which is Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota. And so I came up planning to work on my sabbatical, and at the same time, my research and my work in the academy had increasingly pivoted towards community engagement and community-based research. So partnering with nonprofits to identify research questions that were of importance to them, bringing students in and also community members in to connect around research. And I'd always been a qualitative researcher, so I focus on words rather than numbers, and my the sources of data and knowledge for qualitative research are like humanities scholars, words, but often it's talking to people firsthand, observing everyday interactions, um, and interviews, focus groups, and such. And analyzing documents for kind of patterns and social phenomenon. So I had, my heart had really turned towards uh, work with partners outside of the academy, and also, the events kind of in the nation between from 2015, 2016, 2017 onward was really calling me into research that could have an impact towards informing policy. And so when I was on sabbatical in the Twin Cities, I wasn't, I hadn't done a lot of premeditated, a lot of work to think about what that pivot would look like, but I did have a sense of what some of my skills were. And so I started doing web searches to using those skill sets for jobs. And I put in uh, qualitative researcher, and one job came up, and that was being a parks researcher in the Twin Cities for regional government where I started. And I and so here was an example of how was I going to translate my skills. I was not a parks and recreation researcher. However, I had written my dissertation on the effects of tourism in Costa Rica, and I had also done one of my smallest projects. I had worked with a pharmacy student to look at the kind of public health, the positive public health impacts of a community Zumba class that I had started attending and was really interested in how they sustained and built community and brought women in to continue to exercise who typically didn't participate in exercise. So it wasn't sort of my primary identity. I really the um, reached into the far tentacles of what my career had been to find matches between this job opportunity and who I was as a researcher. And I did a lot of work in my application to translate my skills. The other thing that I had is that I had taught most of my department's research methods classes, and and research methodology is a really important part of public sector research because they want to because it's important to demonstrate to policymakers and to the public that the research is rigorous. And so having that vocabulary of research methodology and that ability to choose appropriate methodologies, again, it was something I sort of took for granted. It was my bread and butter of teaching. I hadn't thought of that as being a specialized skill. It just was part of something that could match up. So I applied for this job and I went through the interview process. I was a finalist and I came in second for the job. The first, not surprisingly, their first choice was someone who was an actual parks researcher and not somebody who their resume lined up perfectly with this job. And fortunately for me, that person turned down the job. And so I, which that's another thing is, coming in second isn't always the worst. Don't lose hope when you come in second or you're the alternate because something may come through for you. And I accepted the job, and I also, and this was at the very end of my sabbatical, and I didn't, I think a privilege that we have as the faculty member is that you can take a leave of absence. And I actually remember you and I talking about that. You saying, oh, you could take a leave of absence. You could, think about, and so it did help me because then I was able to sort of make sure that this transition felt right. And also to, and it did. I knew within a few weeks that it was the right move, but having that security, because giving up tenure is no small thing. And so that enabled me to sort of test the water. And then we might talk about it later, but over time, qualitative research became more and more a part of what I did, and I pivoted into the role that I'm in now.
That sounds fantastic. So you actually did this whole thing, like started to identify a job, and then you went on interview, and you even worked for several weeks, all during the year of sabbatical. So could you describe a little bit more in details about the timeline of job searching and interview during this year? Because one of the things that a lot of like scholars and thinking about applying for other jobs and out of academia is they send out a lot of applications and then not like every one of them turn out like to come up something, right? And then but it sounds like you just applied for a lot of jobs and one came up and then you just got on the interview and you got the job, right?
Yeah, so I am a little bit unusual in this sense that I didn't apply for a lot of jobs. I wasn't, in fact, when this job came up, I remember talking to my husband and saying, "Well, should I apply for this?" And he said, "Well, you're always going to wonder if you didn't." Um, and so I want to acknowledge that my reality is what the way it unfolded for me is not the way it unfolds for everyone. I will also say that having run several job searches since then, that it is that having an academic credential is incredibly valuable. And I think I only applied for this job, and the timeline was I applied for it in the late fall semester, and then there was a very long wait. That's the other thing is that public sector other if you've applied in other job markets, you know this outside of academia, but there's much less communication. You get rejected sometimes, and you don't know that why or what happened. You don't always get email updates about the search process, and that public sector jobs have many fewer applicants generally than an academic job search. I mean, I remember serving on academic search committees that had 80 applicants was a small pool. Hundreds of applicants was a large pool. Um, my most recent hire that I did as a manager, I had 19 applicants. So, and for the parks researcher job, I don't know what the applicant pool size was, but it's a specialized job. I did a lot of work to really translate my skills, and so I think it can be less competitive than academic searches if you do the work of really showing your audience that you understand the um, context that they're working in and you're willing to do that translation.
Fantastic. So, but at that moment, and that is in the spring of 2019, right, close to the end
Hmm.
of the
Hmm.
sabbatical, and then
Hmm.
you thought about making the transition. Was it at that moment, was it a difficult decision to make? And what plays into that decision?
Yeah, I I realized at the time that part of the difficulty was carrying the expectations of other people with me. Um, my parents were very proud of me that I was a tenured professor. Um, to be honest, even though I'm a middle-aged person, I still carry that like what my family thought of me. It's I know that so many academics struggle for a tenure track position and getting tenure, getting into the gate of a tenure track position. There's so few that I recognize, that so sort of how could I give up this thing that so many other people want so much, that's such a highly desirable piece. And there's also, and we're going to talk about this later, things that are beautiful about being a faculty member that I knew I was going to give up. For example, even the sort of mundane things of having an office. I have a cubicle at work. I'm at sort of transitioning into a different work environment, an environment where you work a schedule Monday through Friday, that there's a lot of kind of transitions there. And at the same time, and the other thing that I did that I don't think everybody who applies for a public sector job did is I set up some time to meet with who would be my manager, some one-on-one time, and he fortunately recognized that this was a big transition, and he spent time talking to me about what his expectations would be, what kind of work life I could expect, which was very accurate, but it also reassured me that some of those changes would be um, positive. Uh, there was also so that was hard. Thinking about those pieces were hard. The things that drew me there was I wanted something that was more um, collaborative. A lot of my academic work was done um, alone. Although we would have research colloquia and things like that, it was often a solitary endeavor on campus, preparing for teaching, preparing articles for publication. I wanted to have a more collaborative work setting. I also wanted I had had a lot more success. Unlike you, I never published a book. I did work on a book manuscript that I did not complete, partly because I just realized that my heart wasn't in that step, and also there's a lot of story there, but I had been much more successful in publishing kind of reports, op-ed pieces, and so it appealed to me I love to do research, and it really appeals to me to get to spend most of my time doing research and formulating research projects, but also having that research be something that has a has an audience waiting for it, and a place for it to land and a way that it will be implemented. And so that part is really what kind of tilted me towards making this change, is really wanting my research to be speaking with a different audience. And then finally, I, the public public sector is not like working in the public sector is not like working in private industry in terms of pay, but the pay was better than it was in academia, and the benefits, but by the time you look at health insurance costs, retirement benefits, things like that, that it was a more lucrative job than being in academia. That wasn't the main reason I switched, but it was something that made it possible, made it feel like I could do this experiment without a lot of economic risk.
So speaking of economic risk and speaking of pay, I'm just curious about like because we work at the same institution before. So like how much more do you say you get paid more in your current job compared to a previous like faculty position? This will be something that I think a lot of us will be curious about.
Yeah. So I had been promoted to full, and I was also taking on a commitment that I taught every January interim and a summer school course. And then I would also take on, like, as department chair, I made a small stipend or things like that. And so I think that to be helpful to listeners, I think I was making $86,000 a year when I left Drake. And I started in the public sector at almost 100,000. And I got a raise when I got promoted to manager that was another and then the other thing is that something that has happened during the pandemic and with universities hitting on hard times, I think some universities have not given a raise in years, or they've given very small raises. And I have gotten somewhere between a 4 and 9% raise every year that I've been here. And I'm represented by a union. The union negotiated to take into account inflation. Um, and so I get a raise that has kept, even if I hadn't gotten a promotion, has kept pace with inflation, including, and my health benefits. I realized that I was probably getting another raise equivalent of about $3,000 just because my health insurance benefits were so much more affordable. Um, and I also am paying into a pension that I will have guaranteed, which is really, I can start drawing that in 11 years. Even if I retire sooner, if I wait until 66, I can get that. And then when I got my promotion, I got another uh, raise. So I'm making not quite twice what I made when I left Drake. After, you know, 6 years later.
That sounds very significant just within 6 years. But sometimes in the world, in the real world, we get paid more and then we're asked,
Mm.
so let's describe a little bit like what are you doing? What is the job about? We mentioned it a little bit in the introduction, but what do you think you are doing like on a daily basis? What is the job?
Yeah, yeah. Um, so on the daily basis, I am um, doing research of different kinds to support um, regional planning in understanding the needs of its residents. So our regional government works in several different areas. So we approve uh, all of the local communities' land use comprehensive plans. So we're working in land use policy. We're working in the funding and long range planning of our regional parks and trail system. Minnesota in general and the Twin Cities specifically has a nationally renowned outdoor recreation and park system. And then we also oversee affordable housing policy and our housing choice voucher, so-called Section 8 program. And then I've also worked with the the part of our organization that administers federal transportation dollars and does research related to transportation. And so my work is very varied, which is something that I really love. If you looked at my career over time, I think that that's one reason that academia is a great fit for some people. And for me, it was a great fit for a number of years, but I like being involved in a lot of different things. And success in academia is the ability to specialize and disagree with me if I'm wrong, but you are a specialist and you stay in your specialization and you build a reputation as a scholar in that in one area. Um, I made a lot of big jumps in academia between different topics. I get interested in a lot of different things, and so this job serves me well. I've done a number of things. Sometimes it's technical advising. So a colleague wants to do a successful focus group or they want to do a successful community engagement, and I will help them design work that they will do. Sometimes it's a technical consultant that I provide kind of the qualitative research supervision to a consultant that we hire to do work. And then sometimes I get to lead my own large research project with a staff, both interns and professional staff, where I design the research questions in collaboration with the stakeholders who need the information. I design the methodology, and then we conduct the research in the field and then analyze it and turn it into, typically our tool of communication is our research memos. Or a longer report and presentations. And so there's everything from guiding my own research to kind of helping other people achieve excellence and high quality data in their own work. And then of course there's just like there's service in academia, I do service to my organization. I serve on the governance committee that's the liaison between managers and our equity change team, which is a staff-driven racial equity initiative. I'm designing a process for work planning that I'm going to share out with other managers on the research team that we're going to use to design our collaboration. So, there's sort of those administrative and service tasks too. So, and I guess, and you asked about work balance. It is a different rhythm than academia. So, on the one hand, we work, we have a 5-day work week. There is it, and we work on an hourly schedule, so I fill out a time card. That's very different than being a professor, but there is flexibility when things happen. And also, there's nobody there saying, okay, Darcie, show me the exact minutes on your time card. But there is an expectation that I'm working 5 days a week, and our work schedule is 12 months a year. That said, I have about 8 weeks of paid vacation and holidays. So it's less than when I was a professor, but it's not insignificant. And I can take those days whenever I want. So I have scheduled for myself a 5-day weekend over Veterans Day. I'm taking a week off at Thanksgiving. As a former faculty member, I love traveling in the fall. I've done a lot of trips in October since I've started working here, and I also love being able to take those winter vacations, either to do cross country skiing here or get out of the cold. So that's a nice piece of work balance. And then the other thing is that as a faculty member, I really felt pressure to monitor my email and always be in touch all the time, Saturdays, Sundays. I remember Saturdays when I was department chair, I would answer the dean's email on a Saturday and he would write me back on that Saturday. And then I would write him, like we would have an email exchange on Saturday mornings. And I remember once I was checking email on a national holiday and somebody from Mexico that I was working with was like, this is 4th of July. Why are you working on that holiday? And in state work, people draw very firm boundaries around their schedule. So I, I, I never open my email on the weekends, ever. I never answer. In fact, it would be rude for me to send out email in the evening or send out email over the weekends. That's like antithetical to our culture here.
It sounds like very different culture, like they're in industry and a government job. And then also it's actually a very appealing picture. Seems like you have more work-life balance, and then you get to compensate it like more fairly. And then also you get to work with other people, and also you get to bring your research and contribute to the broader world. So I'm just curious, hearing all this, are there anything that you miss about being a faculty member? You
Mm,
mentioned some of them already, like about, I guess it's the kind of flexibility, right?
mhm,
Like you can decide when and where to work, for example, to take a Monday morning off.
mhm.
But just, are there any aspects that sometimes you think about it and
Yeah.
you miss being a faculty?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's undeniable. Like, I don't think I didn't leave academia embittered. I think there are people who leave academia embittered. I really appreciate how much value universities put on the importance of knowledge and how central intellectual work is to the project of being human, a to having a good society, that we need to value that work. And I think the university is sort of embattled right now of the value of knowledge, and data it's less valued in the public sphere, like both in sort of attack maybe from the federal government and also just the public in general. I think puts less um, emphasis on the importance of knowledge, and also knowledge has been cheapened by the existence of AI, in some ways. And so, but yet, what is that? But there is like a beauty, and there's such an importance to um, the project of creating sort of an intellectual infrastructure within yourself. And I think that that's something that people in the academy do for themselves. They create a culture of that, and also an invitation that they offer to students. That knowledge, and I'd say like that, like I said, that intellectual infrastructure is something that when you have it, it cannot be taken from you, um, and it serves you as a way of you know, making your way in the world in a more, in the best of circumstances, in a more compassionate, um, engaged, uh, engaged way. And I think, and I have met some very smart people here, and I think that that was one sort of arrogance that I had as a professor, that when I came here, I was like, oh, I'm so surprised that people are so well read outside of the academy. Like I carried that sort of arrogance with me, and I've been wrong about that. And yet when my colleagues here have a rich intellectual life, it's on their own time. It's not part of what the job is. And I think that that's important. Both it's satisfying for the individual, and it's also incredibly important for a a society that has that is, like I said, compassionate, beautiful, effective, and so that's something. The other piece is, it is when you have those students who are, I'm lucky because I also get to mentor a young team. I've gotten to work with tons of mini interns, and also I have two early career staff working under me, and so I do get to do some of that mentorship. Um, but it is when you have those magical moments in the classroom where you really have created this like excitement around ideas, and you get to kind of see students making discoveries, that captivate both them and the people around them. That is exciting. That is something to be missed, I think.
But those can be compensated in like mentoring or training like younger colleagues like be in your program, right?
Yeah, so I've taken some of those things. I've started a monthly article discussion group. Our team, this qualitative research team, we've created this portmanteau of quart. It's kind of, and so we call it discourt, like discourse, like where we're bringing these articles in every month. So, and we've started, I've sort of mentored somebody on my team to start a monthly discussion group across all of our community development to kind of talk about a topic that's of interest and use an article. So yes, it is. I have built that into my life because I see it as so valuable. Yeah. And I don't ever have to grade papers, which I don't miss at all.
That's very true. So, besides like running discussions and training young colleagues and mentoring them, are there any ways that you kept in touch with the Purist institution, or your Purist
Um,
colleagues at all, or is
well,
it
yeah,
clean, or is it very clean
yes.
cut?
No, no. Actually, interestingly, I've become more active in the American Sociological Association than I ever was. And I've found myself in demand in a way that I never was when I was in a professor. I joined a applied and public sociology section in the ASA, and I ran for a council position and started serving this year. So I'm going to the ASA every year for the next, I went the last 2 years and for the next 3 years. And by the way, my organization values that a lot and pays, I don't have to apply for special funds. I just fill out a form and they approve it, and I get to go to these national conferences that I'm very grateful for. And so I get to hear new research, but without the pressure of feeling like I have to prove myself or I'm sort of showing that that I'm a good scholar in this field. I'm serving with on the committee, it's about two-thirds academics and one-third people who work outside of the academy. And I feel like I have a good perspective to provide. Oh, like we just did a call for sessions for next year's conference. And I said, well, let's tweak this a little bit so it's a little more inviting to sociologists who are working outside of academia. So it's kind of bringing that perspective. And I've been invited to speak on panels about making the transition from academia into into another career. um, yeah, so I do keep engaged, and I have dear friends from graduate school, all of whom are in academia, that I'm in touch with about their work, and it's fun to get to kind of be a part of the academy in that way. But it's a very low pressure, high enjoyment process.
It sounds like you become more valuable to the academy after you left, after you make the transition,
Kind
like
it,
in some ways.
I feel if the number of invitations to speak is any indicator, yes, definitely, it's been true.
So it sounds like you're always planning the next step, or you always have many different projects going on. So what is next in your career? And what other gigs or projects have you been working on?
So I um, really do enjoy talking to people about their own next steps, their career plans that they're making. And a couple of years ago, I was posting an article about career planning and moving from the academy into uh, another industry. And somebody reached out to me and said, I'm really thinking about this. Do you have any ideas? And I had done this one-on-one with people for years, whether it was students that I was talking with about career planning or faculty colleagues who were running into challenges and wanted a space for ideation. And so I decided to make a leap and uh, try to professionalize this hobby that had delighted me for so long of talking to people about their careers and thinking about how to create a positive next step for themselves. And so I designed a discernment process that is 4 sessions and I work with clients on imagining their career transition. And I'm using a lot of the practices that I've used throughout my career of trying to ask thoughtful questions, inviting people to respond to those in a way where they write it down so they have a chance to really reflect on it, but then coming together and sharing those answers and identifying patterns and insights from what they say that might help them determine first what it is that they're missing in their life right now. Secondly, what are their skills? Thirdly, what it is that they want for their lives moving forward. And then finally, how to take all of those insights and turn it into a job search. And so I am starting to take on that identity of seeing myself as a career coach. And so my firm is Rock Prairie Career Coaching. And yeah, I work with clients and I'm working right now to sort of increase my connection with clients in that area.
Well, interestingly, speaking of like developing a business, the last guest that we talked to in the podcast is Bethany Walensky, and she's a professor in education at Michigan State University. And then I remember one thing that she said is like for people, scholars, idea is currency. And then so she developed a coaching business to help people identify their sabbatical goals and like plans for sabbatical to help people plan their sabbaticals. And then she also developed a business and also very similar to a course that we developed as a teacher. I has modules, discussion session, weekly check-in and stuff like that. So, but you guys are working on completely like different fields and then, but the idea to develop an idea into a business is fairly similar. So let's get a taste of your career coaching style. So if for me, if I come to you, I'm a Chinese historian, and then now I got my tenure, and I like to write, and then I teach. So what advice will you give me, like for some of the skills I can possibly transfer outside of my own field?
Yes, and I think that this is your question highlights an important point that often um, academics, because we have specialized and we recognize that we're working in an industry that's very different from others, we don't see right away how those are transferable skills. Um, however, there are uh, a lot of jobs that would need the kinds of skills that you bring. One is the ability to um, look at you look at historical artifacts, written artifacts. There's also um, what we would call administrative records. There's a tremendous amount of writing that organizations do, stories that they tell themselves about themselves or that they don't know that there's a story in there, and the ability to look at that information and identify patterns and put it into the context of other historical events of that time, and which we might call industry trends, right, is something that could be incredibly important. There's also your ability to juggle multiple projects at once. You're teaching some people are teaching 3, 4 classes. You're working on multiple research projects at the same time. You're working on projects that are in different phases of work. Your ability to articulate what those phases are and then continue multiple projects moving forward at the same time is a kind of project management skill that in humanities-based organizations like nonprofits that have to do with the arts or with history, also public sector organizations that are working in community development, they need people who can find those patterns and share them out in ways that help them see the implications for the work that they're wanting to achieve. So that's just a couple of areas that I could see you thriving in another career.
So
What I
yeah, go ahead.
what I would ask you is, what would you want when you think about your work life now? What would you like to be doing more of, and what would you like to be doing less of?
That's a very difficult question to think about on site, but I resonate with what you said just now. I think I am concerned about AI. I'm concerned about many of our teaching aspects will be replaced by technology. Um, Also, sometimes sometimes I lost my view to see the value of grading, so I don't know what am I grading and if my feedbacks and grades are really helping students to develop. In terms of question about what I want to see more in my career, I guess I see some values and I enjoy more aspects more than the others. Like for example, I enjoy writing and creating. But I also understand that like as a job, as a faculty, it's a whole package. You can't pick and choose. You can't be
Mm-hmm.
writing all the time and then you have to serve. You have to do service and you have to
Mm-hmm.
do teaching. But even for
Mm-hmm.
teaching, you don't really teach all the time. And there are some aspects are like all related to service or customer service. So I do enjoy the creating and the writing part. But a little bit different from you, I'm not sure if I really like to collaborate because I
Mm-hmm.
really enjoy the autonomy and I like to make my own
Mm-hmm.
schedule. So I guess this is one of the pulling factor to me, like to
Yeah.
enjoy being a faculty member.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and one thing I hear in
Yeah.
that, I think if any consultants came and said, I have your solution for your concern with I would be extremely skeptical because I think we're in a moment of high uncertainty. I think I could only, yeah, I'll circle back to that. Um, but I think, and I would also want to talk to you about, and I think you've already answered this, are you thinking, is it possible to retool the job that you're in now to see things, to experience it differently and bring more of what you enjoy in and less and take out less of what you don't enjoy? Um, but when I hear you talking about that you enjoy writing and creating and you like that independent work, I think that feels like consulting rather than moving into an another workplace, right? And there's a lot of there's work for historians in consulting, particularly if you're able to talk about yourself as a public historian and you're able to demonstrate how you can identify stories about an organization, about a geographic entity, about a family history that would be answering questions that they find to be important, but you could do that on your own. um, you design the schedule and you do that work and then you bring the work back to have that conversation with them. There are my organization did a public history project that we hired a consultant for recently, and there's not, and I know that there's not a lot of historians that are working as this kind of consultant. There are historians that are doing work and sort of uh, doing research uh, on buildings that are going to go into the National Registry, but not historians that are kind of telling these large, kind of bigger picture stories. And so there is a field for that, and that's something that one could do without giving up tenure and without giving up their job. You market yourself for one of those projects a year, and you could completely do that and sort of immerse yourself in that history. Um, and then I also hear um, maybe a call to do a little more exploration around um, asking yourself, what are assignments for, and what are your projects for, and how do you co-create an understanding with your students of why you're asking them to do the work, and also navigating through some kind of experimentation and exploration and maybe playfulness around where AI plays a role in that and where they might want to develop that intellectual infrastructure for themselves. And one thing that's a little different in our conversation here, first of all, I know you, and this is sort of we've had this thread of conversation for a while. And also the process that I do with clients is, I'm a very sort of fast responder to people, and I try to slow down that process to encourage them to do some writing on their thinking, and for me to look at that outside of our one-on-one conversation before we connect together. But I really enjoy, I mean, I hope you can see from this conversation that you have a lot of skills that could be taken to other settings and to create a different life for yourself, or the kind of, or a life that more closely approximates what you're hoping for.
That sounds fantastic. I feel like this conversation should not only just be between you and me, but should happen earlier in graduate school. It should be a class that I wish I could invite you to talk with graduate students, like for them to
Mm,
think not at this moment after we are tenure, but in graduate school to start
mhm,
thinking about all these alternatives, like all these um opportunities, but like not as a
mhm.
second choice, but those are wonderful choices. So a quick follow-up question. If people are interested in all these possibilities, like where should they start to look? Like even the first step, right? Where should they look? Where can they start?
Yeah, I think that there are, um, well, I would be happy to speak with anyone who is interested in sort of the internal process, but I have noticed that the professional organizations I'm a part of have really begun to have more conversations about creating careers for PhDs outside of academia. And of course, part of this is a structural shift that we're not that is not uh, great to consider, which is that the number of tenure track positions has decreased significantly. Part of this is an obligation rather than a joyful choice. And at the same time, I think professional organizations have gotten our disciplinary organizations have gotten a lot better at creating tools for job searches outside of academia. I know the American Sociological Association has created a number of tools and resources. They have webinars on a regular basis about this professional development. And also, I'm connected with the Academic Planning Association. So that's for planners working, the sort of the disciplinary specialization for people working in uh, the public sector, in land use and other kinds of planning. They've started to do this sort of professional development too. And I think that that's a good place to start, because you can find people. Each discipline has its own um, set of specialized skills, its own way of talking about itself. And so to talk with other people who have been in that, who are working in your field, they can help you with those specific translational moves that you can make to market yourself outside of academia.
That sounds a great place to start. I also remember when we talked to our last guest, who developed a side gig of a coaching business for
Hmm.
sabbatical, and she mentioned that she worked with about 14, 15 clients
Hmm.
in the span of about 2 years. And
Hmm.
interestingly, she mentioned that all 14 clients so far are women. So I just
Isn't that
wanna see, I just wanna ask about your experience as a career coach. And are your clients also women? And do you think women in this field, just in general, needs more like coaching and advice?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that appealed to me about your podcast is that you really are, ex- you're naming those identity categories that create unique circumstances for working to achieve tenure or creating a career transition. For women scholars, for people who are parents in the academy, and also I know you've worked with a lot of international scholars. All of us are coming into an economy that was not imagined for us when it was designed. That's true in the academy. It's also true outside of the academy. I think that's something that all of those all of those categories. I think particularly international scholars and women scholars, that there's a requirement to be able to look carefully at at the organizational structures, at how institutions work, at how culture um, is created and articulates itself within the organization, and figuring out how to maneuver and do that translational work just to make it into the workplace, to get hired, to get tenure. And so I think that that might be part of it. I think also we see in data about sort of levels of social connection, levels of seeking help, that women are more likely to seek help. And that being said, I have worked with men in my process, in career coaching. It's mostly been women, but I have had men I have worked with men before, so it's but you have to be willing to kind of bring your vulnerability to the process and really honestly self-assess. And I think men are often socialized that that's not what they're supposed to do. But and one thing I like about coaching is there is sort of a assumption of a safe environment where vulnerability is expected and it's done confidentially. And so that's hopefully something that coaching can provide for people regardless of gender. Yeah.
So we have learned a lot about you as someone who transitioned out of academia and you left on a high note. Yeah, you left because you were successful, not other reasons. So that's very different. And also as a career coach who help people to identify their goals and strengths. And you even gave me some advice like on sites here. So I think that's my favorite part of the whole podcast. So what's one advice would you give to faculty who are interested in exploring other opportunities and listening to a podcast beyond a conventional faculty job based on your experience?
Mhm. Um, I think it's kind of carrying two things that might be in contradiction with you at the same time. One is the humility to think about how your work is, to put at the forefront how your work is of service to others. When an employer is wanting to hire you, um, they are wanting to know that you are going to make things easier for them in their workplace. And so, um, while one of the things I'm most proud of are those peer review articles that I had published in the most difficult journals during my career, that is not showing how I will be of service to my employer. And so really taking the time to slow down and translate into the language that they use that the employer uses to understand um, their evaluation of candidates. And that takes some humility because it means that the words you choose aren't always the best ones. It means that the skills that you are most proud of might be auxiliary to some other skills that you sort of take for granted, or so doing that translational work. But yet on the other hand, this is where the contradictory piece is, to really hold in your mind that you are an incredibly skilled and valuable um, thinker and employee. I think that that applying for tenure track jobs, the process of going up for tenure and having to constantly prove yourself, and that it other other people in the academy feel like it's their job to show why you show the faults in what you're doing, to critique your argument, or to turn you away at the gates and choosing someone else. Like, you have to sort of be your own cheerleader, your own truest believer in your value and your worth. And those are that humility and also self-confidence are sometimes hard to hold at the same time, and yet you have to do both if you're going to make that career transition.
The tension between humility and confidence is amazing. You have to be confident and not sell yourself short, but on the other hand, you have to also accept that what you achieve the most, you think you achieve the most, you're most proud of, might not be most relevant, right, and
Uh-huh.
valuable, like in the new field. So before we end this conversation, what else would you like us to know, Darcy?
And you've done such a good job of answering all of those questions, or asking questions that we can talk about. I don't think I have anything to add. It's just I think that I guess one thing it's not the perfect fit right here, but that your ability to, like, the way that you connect with people and see value in these extended conversations is an important part of having a satisfying career, whether it's within the academy or it's looking for a new position. Like, that investing in these relationships, we're often, like you said, we're in a hurry. We don't see them as vital, and yet they're part of part of what makes us human and makes having a career worth the time.
I have to say, being able to connect with you at Drake and being able to reconnect with you when I'm in Dallas is like one of the best part of my job. Like something that
That's
I miss I love most about my job.
Yeah, you have a real skill for connecting. So thank you for this.
Oh, I think we click with each other like in this aspect. I'm very, very excited about all your new plans, and I wish you like all the best with all the future projects, like all the side gigs, and you always have a lot on your mind. And I wanna restate like one more time, you're a very, very kind and generous person, and someone that really, really fun to talk to. So I really think that you deserve the best, and no matter what you choose to do. Thank you so much for your time again, Darcie, and great to talk to you.
Thanks, Anne.
Hello again. Now we have learned about Darcie's story. Darcie is very generous and to an extent honest and courageous to share her journey to leave academia as a full professor and work as a quantitative researcher in a regional government. Her story is unique to me because it is a story not about the pushing factors, but more about the pulling factors of what you enjoy more about the job. And I'm sure her parents and people she cares will understand and be proud of her decision as time goes by. I hope this episode provides you some thoughtful questions to think about different aspects of the job. What aspects can be improved within the job, and what aspects might have to lead to a more fundamental change, and where to look for those opportunities so you don't feel trapped. What I found the most interesting about this thought process is that what you are trained for and are proud of the most might not be the most valuable in the new field, and you might have to accept this new reality. As Darcie said, it is about the tension between confidence and humility. For graduate students, I wish this conversation can happen as early as possible in graduate school and should happen more often. If you're interested in exploring other opportunities beyond a faculty position, or just curious about what kind of skills are valued in industry and government, please check out Darcie Vandergrift and her work. Last but not least, do women in general need more advice and coaching? I will continue to look for the answers. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next episode.
If you enjoyed this episode of Tenure, a Game Manual, make sure to check out our other episodes. Or if you can't get enough of us, follow us on social media at Tenure, a Game Manual. If you like what we do, consider leaving us a rating. We'd really appreciate it. This episode was produced by Sebastian Bancesco. Our executive producer and host is Dr. An Lee, and today's guest was Dr. Darcie Vandergrift. Sebastian Bancesco is also our editor, and we are generously sponsored by the Provost Teaching Fellow Program and the UT Dallas's Center for Teaching and Learning. Thanks for listening. We've now reached our special segment where this season we ask academic professionals a question. Make sure to stick around at the end of each episode to hear the next question. Today we have a very special guest speaker. We asked former Deputy Federal Highway Administrator and UT Dallas Business Law Professor Dr. Walter Sutton, what is a big change you'd like to see in academia in the next 10 years? Here's what he said.
I believe the next 10 years will be very challenging to academia. I think that as we confront this issue of incorporating artificial intelligence into our curriculum, we're going to have to take a different approach. I think it's not going to be so much the transfer of knowledge as it is training our students to be critical thinkers. I think that it is important that the students know how to communicate. I think that their management skills, how they manage individuals, will still be a key component that we will be able to work with them on. Because with AI, it's going to be like they're managing a team of a digital team. They'll have one person may manage 30 people, digital people, but they're still going to have personal interaction with their coworkers. I think that it's amazing to me even today that so many students are reluctant to even speak up in class. Now that may be as a result of COVID and them being isolated, but we're going to have to develop students that will be more critical thinkers, students that can communicate, because that human aspect of the work environment will remain the same regardless of artificial intelligence. And so I want the university and the education curriculum to focus on that, to focus on critical thinking. Now, we do that in law school, but I think that we actually have to incorporate some of those same techniques into undergraduate education as well. And if we can teach the kids critical thinking, teach them management skills, I think they can be successful even in a world where AI is predominant. Now, I think AI is hot right now, but 10 years from now, there's going to be something else. When I was coming along, we were all afraid of the internet. We were all afraid of all these other, progressive methods of doing business that came about. But we nevertheless were able to survive that. I remember the year 2000, we thought the whole system, when we turned from 1999 to 2000, Y2K, what's going to happen? Everybody was freaking out about that. And it was nothing. Nothing happened. And so I don't want us to minimize AI, but I do want us to learn to work with it and make it an asset. And so our students will have to learn AI, but they will also have to learn critical thinking and management skills.